everyone, I'm Elaine Chow.
And I'm Trist Curless.
And welcome to the Musician's Loop.
Loop, like a drum loop?
No, like the kind of thing that a jeweler uses to evaluate gems.
Oh, like a magnifying glass, like what we'll do on this podcast, actively listening to music like a musician.
That's right. And every week, we are choosing a track to dive into together and share our thoughts about what we find intriguing about the song.
Whether it's songwriting, chord progression, instrumentation, recording technology, arrangement, whatever, we're looking at the music we love through the lens, or the loop, of decades in the music industry.
Hey, Trist, what do we have this week?
Oh, good one this week. We have a representation of something called Vocalese, which we'll get into. It's not a dessert topping. It's not a household cleaner. We'll talk about what that is. And also, we're going to have references to the story of Peter Rabbit.
Ooh, okay. Classic Beatrix Potter.
How about that for an interesting lead? This is Lambert, Hendricks, and Ross, and their Vocalese version of the song from Duke Ellington's Cottontail.
Okay, Cottontail. Well, Lambert's, Hendricks, and Ross, I'm really looking forward to this. I've always wanted to listen more to them. Certainly within vocal music spheres, they are, unparalleled.
Legendary, legendary, legendary.
Absolutely. Okay, so before we get into this, can you tell us a little bit about how we should be listening to music as members of the Musician's Loop community?
We here at the Musician's Loop strongly encourage you to improve your listening situation if you are able. So if you're able to put on the nicer pair of headphones, go into the room that has the nicer speakers, etc., please do so. And as always, regardless of how you're listening, we're glad you're joining us from wherever it is. Even if you are stuck with whatever listening you have, we're just glad to have you listen at all.
Awesome. So we're going to go ahead and leave the links inside of the show notes for you to listen to on all of your favorite platforms, and we'll be right back. Oh my goodness, that was so cute. It was so cute.
It's a great one.
It is absolutely amazing. Actually, this is not the first time that I have heard the song. A local Bay Area jazz vocal group had done a complete a cappella cover of this song, and it was always one of my favorite things that they performed as a part of their repertoire.
Ooh, you must be talking about my friends in Plus 4 dB.
Yes, definitely.
Wow.
Miss you guys. Love you all. Hope you're all listening.
We are as niche as it can get here at the Musician's Loop. Yeah, they did do this. That's right. Lambert, Hendricks, and Ross, known for these individually and as a group in the style of Vocalese. By the way, my introduction to that was a tip of the hat to my co-workers in the Manhattan Transfer. That was the bit that they would say because they had so much music that they did that was in the Vocalese style, and those were some of the jokes they used to say about it. It's not a dessert topping. It's not a household cleaner, etc. Miss you, girls. So basically what we're dealing with is lyrics added not only to a melody of a song, but also stories added and written to every improvised solo or section that happens. So not just the main melody. This comes from the Duke Ellington Orchestra. So we'll also include in this show links the original recording that these were based on. So if you listen to them back and forth, you'll recognize trumpet solos or entire sections of the orchestra of the big band playing different parts that the group ended up singing. John Hendricks was the one that would write all of the lyrics, and in this instance decided on the story of Peter Rabbit. And I love the fact that in all of these cases, no matter what he's doing, he's only given the song and a single title, and then he goes from there. So no idea if he ever got to talk to Duke Ellington about what he was thinking, but just having a title and then running with it was really the magic of John Hendricks.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things about Vocalese, if I were to summarize what I just heard, is that it would take instrumental tracks and then write lyrics to those instrumental tracks. and sing them. And that was something that was particular to Lambert's, Hendricks, and Ross. And then later on, Manhattan Transfer and a number of other groups began to pick up this theme as well.
Yeah, the Manhattan Transfer album called Vocalese all includes lyrics written by John for the album.
Oh, that's amazing. And he's fantastic. And just thinking about getting just the name of the song. Now, one of the things that I realized was that the Duke Ellington song was Cottontail, two different words,
Right.
while this version is Cottontail, all one word. An interesting side note there, I was looking up Cottontail, and that was the name of the littlest sister. Fun fact here. I was looking at the lyrics and talked about Flopsy and Mopsy as brothers. And I'm like, oh, wait, aren't they sisters? And it turns out they actually are three sisters, Flopsy, Mopsy, and Cottontail. So Cottontail is a third sister.
How about that?
Yeah, and I went back to the cover that Plus 4DB had done, and they actually changed it to sisters instead of brothers. So I'm like, call out to people who are hardcore Beatrix Potter people.
How about that? It doesn't surprise me at all. It's probably kind of more amazing that just out of nowhere, he remembered that those were the other two names without probably referencing it. You know, if he had referenced it from the literature somewhere, he maybe would have included it being the sister. Of course, I'm just hypothesizing on his methodology, and in writing that, he remembered those were the two of the other bunny names that included them. John was amazing in the way that he would pull from different literary references, cultural references, etc.
One thing I really loved about this song was how much character it had in terms of telling Peter Rabbit's story and the personality that he has in there. Just a couple of little things where as he's running, he's like, ah, and I run. And just the interplay between Peter and his mom and all of the wisdom that his mom had left him. And he was like, no, I'm not going to listen. So this story that we know so well, and one of the things we've talked about before in this podcast is talking about our cultural references and how that influences how we intersect with music. And this is one where Peter Rabbit is such a childhood staple and such a classic that we automatically understand what the song is talking about.
Even some of the passages that fly by, technically they're flying by and you can't necessarily always understand all of the lyrics. You're right. You still, because it's a story you understand, it's easier to make more inferences and understanding what the lyrics are. It's really great storytelling. And I think he's just magical the way he's able to write these lyrics that fit the music. And when he would work with the transfer, he would tell them, yeah, just think about the music and the melody. You know, I'm sure he would like people to understand the words, but his priority was always that you're relaying what the music is before worrying about what the words were. And I think his talent was writing the lyrics in such a way that you could very easily do both. You could very easily portray what the music was and sing all the really fast passages. And he wrote the lyrics in a way to sometimes even help you be able to do it better.
But the lyrics are also so clever. And I think about, some of my favorite lyrics from the song, every little carrot is a stolen delight. Oh, that's so clever, right?
Yeah.
And later on, he's talking about because carrots and you make a very good stew.
Yes.
And I'm like, oh, it's so cute.
Yes. Yeah. My favorite lyric of the whole thing is actually the very last one. I've heard the old story, one rabbit's foot will bring luck, but they're much more luckier, Natch, if the rabbit's attached.
Well, let me also talk about some of the language that's in the lyrics, because the phrase natch is something that is very specific to a part of American slang at a particular generation. I never grew up using the word natch. I feel like that was something that really was in the late 1950s, early 1960s slang. Is that something that you heard growing up?
No, I don't even particularly put that on a period. I think about that because I'm more familiar with the way that John would write. There may come from that, and it's not of my time either. That's part of the genius of the way he would write. Knowing that he wanted to say naturally and wanted something that rhymed and knew if he shortened it to natch, he could make it all fit. I think there may be times where he would be using some slang that was of a period that he was alive that I wasn't aware of, but I think more than anything, it's usually the case that he was just for his own literary needs or rhythmic needs in the passage, trying to get the combination of the rhythm he needed, but also sell the message. There are many examples through his lyrics where he makes his own little shortcut, and it's not necessarily something people would have known. It's like he would create that. That's what that one feels like to me.
I mean, the reason I mentioned this is that I had read it in a Trixie Belden book,
Mm,
and Trixie Belden was really like 1960s, 1970s. And I was like,
perfect.
who
Yeah.
uses Natch, right?
There you
And
go. Well, there it
so,
is.
so now I see it. But
That
going
makes
back to
sense.
the cleverness of the lyrics, I'm just looking at another one. He's like, I'm a hooked rabbit. Yeah, I got a carrot habit. And
Right.
it's just so, it's so much fun. Now, I don't know his entire lyric writing career. You've sung a lot as a part of the Manhattan Transfer. Are a lot of the lyrics there also similarly clever?
Yeah, he goes the spectrum. I will say it's not every single song. There are some lyrics that maybe he needed to do hurriedly that don't go as deep, maybe aren't as complex or as clever. But boy, there sure are a lot. There are a lot that have some interesting storytelling or sometimes just his own musings, just some of his beliefs that he wanted to share with the world that he would weave into some of these tapestries that he's telling, especially on some of the more extended solos, like a really long trumpet solo. He might kind of go about anywhere. I think probably another favorite example of that is the Clifford Brown solo on Joy Spring. He's telling all kinds of stories. That whole song is kind of about the fountain of youth, and he just goes on and on and on. His nickname was the James Joyce of Jive. And so that maybe tells you a little bit about what others thought of his writing.
I think that James Joyce might be right because this song has a very strong storytelling aspect to it. I was thinking about the Jim Croce song that we reviewed early on in this podcast, and we were talking about storytelling songs, and this struck me as being a very clear storytelling song because it covers the entire gamut of the story of Peter stealing carrots from this
Hmm.
farmer, including all of the emotional stuff that's happening. I felt like that was something that was really interesting for me to hear, just knowing Peter Rabbit so well, but also knowing how he's plugging this music into a very constrained environment because he has this music that he has to follow. And it has to map note to this existing instrumental piece. So, really interesting to think about that.
Yeah, I love that he's able to do the storytelling and totally imbue all of the stylistic feel and musicality of the big band and of the solo. That's the key. It still feels like the same music. When you listen to the instrumental, it's like, oh yeah, this feels like the same thing. It's not some big takeoff from it. And it's fun to find the actual recordings. Obviously, this was a piece of music in Duke Ellington's repertoire. So there are probably hundreds of recordings of different live performances where, yeah, some of the sections where the whole section is playing something, like that'll be the same, but then the solos will just be different. You could go to look up any recording of Duke Ellington playing Cottontail, and some of these sections will sound right. The main melody, of course, and a lot of the different shout choruses and different soli sections that the whole band is playing, those don't change performance to performance. But there's just this one recording where the improvised solos are taken from. So if you ever are searching that stuff out, when you're suspecting there's a Vocalese, you need to find the actual recording that they took it from if you want to try to follow and see how well it's done.
Yeah, the reference track is what you're talking about.
Yep.
Well, interesting to think about that. And speaking of reference tracks, one of the things that I noticed about the reference track was the difference in tempo. And I think about the Lambert's, Hendricks, and Ross version, and it's much, much faster at a much frenetic pace than the Duke Ellington version. And as a third reference point, I do have a recording of Plus 4DB doing this on an album that, they released back in the late 90s, early 2000s. And that is even at a third tempo, somewhere in between the two. So, can you talk a little bit about the relationship of tempo and the energy of the song? Or can you hazard a guess as to why they might have chosen to do this at a faster tempo?
Well, there's a lot of different factors, and I'm intimately familiar with this particular one. This is the plug portion of the podcast. I have a kind of a collective of singers that do concerts that are basically a tribute to Lambert, Hendricks, and Ross. So when we've taken this one on, I've found that when we practice it, it's actually easier to sing along with the instrumental recording, and we like the feel of it more, like it swings a little better. And that's going to be just group to group, person to person. Because it does move along and there's a lot to get in, I think sometimes you have the perception that it's a little faster than it needs to be. You're like, oh, I have to fit all this in. And then you get done with it and realize, oh, wow, we were going a lot faster even than the original. So I think the intent is probably to replicate it fairly well. And then I think it's possible by the time they recorded it, they just got into a pace and a groove where that's what felt good to them, which is totally fine. It's not like they had to have it exactly the same tempo, but I would suspect that's likely why. Sometimes even just a few clicks in either direction and it's more difficult to sing. And also the trick with there is sometimes that spot isn't until like a third or 2/3 of the way through the song. So when you count it off, you have to think of that section, sing it to yourself, and then count off the tempo there instead of at the beginning. That's a trick that you kind of have to do sometimes. Like, oh, there's this really fast part that I have to make sure is the perfect tempo. So you choose that one as your count off example in your brain so you don't mess up what the tempo is.
And I think a lot of it is that vocally speaking, doing vocalese is really challenging because you're singing all of these different notes and you have to be very precise about them. And they could be all over your range as you're jumping up and down, trying to replicate what these instruments are doing. One of the other things that I wanted to think about in terms of tempo is not only how you execute on it, but also how tempo influences music and our perception of it. Certainly, I got a sense of more frenetic action, which, given that you're talking about a bunny that's trying to escape a garden, is one of those things where it's like, okay, it can be quicker. And also, it adds to the sense of vibrancy where you're like, oh, okay, so it's not just anxiety, it's also fun. Like it sounds really fun at this particular tempo. And
True.
I'm not advocating for one tempo versus another, but I could see where maybe the conversations around the tempo had to do more around how it felt to audiences and how it felt also, like you were mentioning, to the individual performers.
Yeah, I think those are both super valid here. I think they do both of those things exactly like you said. That's a great point. If it's a little more relaxed, it doesn't sound like the rabbit's in that much trouble from getting shot from stealing all these carrots. So there needs to be an urgency to that. And then you're right, it's not as bouncy as fun in general. Yeah, it's true. I think sometimes the tempo can affect that. And it's interesting in live performance how your perception of that can be different night to night, depending on just the day, the environment, what else is happening in your life, in the space, in the mood of the crowd, where it is in the song set of the show. If it's the opener, it has a certain energy. It's different if you've already done a whole show. If it follows a song that was also fast, wait, does it need to be a little faster or a little slower than the last one? Is it okay if it's the same? There's all these different factors where tempo matters.
I love that you mention the live performance aspect of it because I think that's actually something that I loved about this to begin with. When I first heard the song, it was in the context of a live performance, and the various singers, they sold this song. There's so much about the song that's so fun, and you're thinking about Peter Rabbit just like, "Oh, no, I gotta run." In the context of the musician's loop, we're really only listening, but performance also has a very visual aspect to it, and I think that there is something about this in my experience with the song that was very visual. It was very experiential from that perspective. I'd be interested in hearing how you see the physical aspect of performance impacting how it lands with the audience.
You are equipped with the great story. So you don't have to necessarily do a lot other than just don't obscure it or get in its way. Don't do something to distract from how cool the story is. So when you have that solo addressing the room and telling the people, hey, here's this thing that happened, and then also getting back into formation, if you will, like when the three of them are all singing, like, oh, this is a spot where the whole band would be playing. Because for us, at least in the live performance, there's this understanding of what we're doing. We've already probably covered the fact, or in this audience, they're likely to know that these are derived from instrumental pieces. So that physical thing of like stepping forward to tell part of the story, you can imagine, oh, yep, this is the Ben Webster saxophone solo. If you don't know that specific, you can tell, oh, this must be one of those solos because it just kind of goes on and on and on and it sounds like it might be improvised. And then when they step back and everyone's singing together, especially the few times that they do break into a little harmony, you can physically see them be together and you can hear it. Oh, this is when the whole band is playing.
Hmm.
Even if it's not always exactly that, the physical performance helps not only tell the story, but remind you of the origin of the music.
And that's an interesting take on that question. So I think I was going more towards the embodiment of the actual performer who was singing and
Hmm.
how that person sells the song. And I wasn't thinking so much about the relationship to the previous performance, whether it's like the more instrumental performance, as opposed to I get to sell these lyrics
Hmm.
because they're fun and I can put myself in the character.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. Well, any last thoughts before we move on?
Oh, I mean, that's it. If you enjoy this at all, just keep going down a rabbit hole, if you will, and check out more Lambert, Hendricks, and Ross and find the original recordings. And it's really fun. Still to this day, I'll hear some of the original recordings. I might know the Lambert, Hendricks, and Ross, and I don't really know the instrumental. Some of the tunes maybe that I haven't ever really sung and had to really study. And just out in the wild, in a jazz club or in a coffee shop or somewhere, I'll hear the original solos and remember the lyrics to them. And so that's always kind of fun. It's like, oh, this is the one that they took that from.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for this introduction. And with that, we'll move on to our next segment, which is
Mailbag.
okay. Yes, the mailbag. This week's entry is from Threads. It's from the account of Jonathan Smith Guitar, and it was from February of 2026. He posts, actually, these are two posts. What if musicians practice the way athletes train? And then the follow-up, because he got some really good response off of that, is digging the energy here. I totally agree. Many musicians already train like athletes. My real question is about the system around the practice, coaching, recovery, and support. What would change if music had the same support system sports does?
I think there are indeed situations and scenarios where that does exist. I think this question comes out of the fact that it probably doesn't exist that much, not nearly as much of the same amount of support, the same kind of support. I guess it all just speaks to a priority of a society, of a culture, where they put their energies, what has importance, what feels like it needs support, whether it's emotional, coaching, financial, etc.
And he actually posts three different things, right? Coaching, recovery, and support. And I feel like coaching is at least available,
Yeah.
even if you don't take advantage of it. You
Hmm.
have access to vocal coaches and choirs, instructors, etc. So I feel like coaching is pretty well taken care of. And actually, if you think about any of the other instruments you might be playing, there are coaches out there as well. So
Hmm.
we're talking about piano teachers, guitar teachers, drum instructors, etc. And I think about then recovery and support as two different areas. And that's one where I'm not entirely as sure about what that might look like. So, what thoughts do you have being a vocalist?
Well, I think coming up through and working and being involved in more of the educational system and the way those really, I guess that's where I go. He doesn't ask about that specifically, but I guess when I see that question, I relate it to a high school or a college, any institution where there is a writing club and a math club and a football team and a basketball team and a rowing team and a choir and a band and a jazz choir and a big band or whatever, and seeing how those are supported differently. And generically, I would say that the sports tend to be more supported. Again, there are definitely places where I've been where the different arts programs are incredibly supported. And actually, that tells me a little bit of the answer is it makes a big difference. The numbers of people involved and the quality where the talent is able to manifest itself into a greater quality output, more focus, and more of a real goal inside of these individuals that might continue to do that past their schooling. I think what really scares me is when I see public service ads to get people to donate to save sports programs in schools. which I'm in full support of. I love sports. I'm a big sports fan. I was involved in the sports programs as an athletic trainer when I was in school. So definitely not an anti-sports perspective from me. However, just as I've traveled around for my job in doing that, I definitely see a larger conglomerate of money support in lots of different parts of the country, more supportive to those rather than arts programs.
Yeah, that's interesting to think about because at least where I grew up, it was, I'd say, pretty well balanced, if not skewing more towards the arts. Now, I didn't go to an arts magnet school. I actually went to a more academically focused one in suburban San Francisco. And I think about, well, we had a full-time choir and band teacher, but we didn't have any full-time sports coaches. And so thinking about the level of investment there was a level of investment. Now I know that things have changed in the decades since I've graduated from high school, but if I think about how we as a society value one or another, certainly from an educational perspective, the answer should be yes. You should have lots of opportunities for kids to feel like they are plugged into community and into interests that, matter to them. And so if you starve one to feed the other or starve, the other to feed the one, you end up in a weird unbalanced situation. But I think going back to the thought of what does recovery and support look like for these particular industries, let's take it from a couple of different tiers. So we have the more amateur tier, people who are learning or who just want to do things for community. And then you have maybe the more semi-professional, like still what some people might call tent making, where they have their own career, but they're also pursuing some kind of artistic pursuit. And then the third one would be full time. I think that we're talking about coaching being available at all three of these levels, but I think that the level of support, maybe because we are not thinking of these particular activities as needing that level of support, would be an interesting thing for us to think through. Like, what is it that recovery is going to need? Is it just rest? Is it medication? Is it like a more specialized medical community that focuses on this? I don't know if I have a really clear answer to this because certainly we have sports medicine, but we don't have musicians' medical specialties.
Sure.
But do we need it? Certainly we have like ear, nose, and throat specialists who would be focused on the health of the respiratory system. But yeah, I'm mulling through that right now, and I don't really have a clear perspective on it yet.
Yeah, true. I think when I think more about this, the support in all of those, whether they're, again, sports, different academic things, again, like it's the speech and debate team, any club, any communal system, something outside of class, again, a band, choir, theater, marching band, football team, basketball team, wrestling, whatever, all of those are extracurricular. In all of those disciplines, there's a small percentage that might go do that for their career, that might be a professional athlete. Just like there's maybe a small percentage that are involved in the arts that'll go on to do that in the arts. At that level, you're really building the team building, the working together, the responsibility, all the different life lessons you learn from being on a sports team, being a single part of an entity that can excel together and your own responsibility therein. So I think they're equally valuable, and it's just a matter of deciding and letting everybody understand that those attributes happen in all of them.
I was even thinking about the concept of community and how that might differ between sports and music. But then I started thinking, well, in certain sports, it is pretty individual. You're thinking about ice skating, or you're thinking about some of these,
Golf,
yeah, these more
tennis.
individual pursuits. And at the same time, there are communities that are created as a part of it. You're at the gym at the same time. And so not everything is team sports in the same way that not all music is team music. I certainly grew up just as an individual piano student, and I didn't get involved in choirs or any other type of community music making until college. And so I'm thinking about, hey, what does it mean for the support structure to be there? And I'm not fully convinced that it's not.
Again, I think there are some generalities and some things that might show themselves to be there, and sometimes that support happens in a way that maybe just isn't as visible.
Yeah, I think that is something that I can get around. And so, as we take a look at the parallels between athletic training and musical training, or even the communities around them, I think it really is what you make of it. Certainly, you can find community in whatever you do, even if it's a bunch of people making music independently and sharing it with one another and supporting one another. So, maybe this is just a call out to say that we can be each other's recovery and support structures if we reach out and create that community.
Indeed. Great question.
Awesome. Okay, so any last thoughts before we wrap up?
That's about it. If you have any other thoughts about Lambert, Hendricks, and Ross, Vocalese, jazz, big band, or any of the other topics maybe that we covered on one of our episodes that you listen to, please drop us a line and give us a comment or a question about it.
Yes, and you can reach us via email at themusiciansloop, that's LOUPE at gmail.com, or via Instagram or Threads. Our handles there are at themusiciansloop. So hope to see you soon. Thank you for joining us this week, and see you next time.
Thank you.
No, what is the phrase?
But boy, not from the perspective of a
The
rabbit.
Like, I actually did not correct my voice on one of them because if I did, it cut out the siren, and the siren was in the credits. I was like, but I want the siren. The siren was amusing.
I got nothing.